Hey guys, how you doing? I hope everybody had a wonderful week. We have a big class today where we are going to put together the big picture because we could look at all the historical details. We could look at this, we could look at that, but ultimately it's understanding the big picture, the why. Why did our founding fathers, the people that founded this country, put together this document? What was their driving motivation? Well, let's go back and review. It all starts the French and Indian War. And everything was kumbaya, right? The American colonists and the King of England, they were on the same team fighting in a war against the French and the Indians. And there were also some Indians on the side of the King and the Americans. But basically it was England and the American colonists versus France and the Indians. And they had this war and they would win the war and everything's kumbaya. But after that, things would start to change. But they were on the same team. They got along. And after the war, the English crown owed money to who? The banks. And that created a divide between the American colonists and the King of England. The king came along and said, you have to pay for the war. This war was fought to protect you. And the colonists, the American colonies said, this was your war. We didn't need your protection. You pay for the war. And so the king would start a series of events. But take a look at this map. Look on the top, you can see is a world map. And the map on the bottom half, shows the distance from England, where the King of England was, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to the American colonies. The American colonies are that little red section right there. And across the ocean, that green section, that is England. So England was very far away from the American colonies, yet there was this very close relationship because the colonies were subjects. They belonged to England, to the King of England. And of course, back then, were there cars? No. Were there planes? No. Were there boats and trains? No. So when you see that England was across an ocean, understand that that was very far away. You can't get on a plane and go across the ocean. There were no planes. You can't get in a speedboat, right? I'm sorry, there were boats, but the boats didn't have engines, right? So they had boats, but they didn't have boats with engines. They had sailboats, which meant it took a very long time to get across an ocean, to get from England to the American colonies. There was a great distance separating these people. Because back then, the way people got around was via sailboat. And that's not powered by gasoline or oil. It's the wind power. You put up your sail, you hope the wind blows, and if it does, you might be able to pick up a little bit of speed. Or, instead of traveling by car or train, they traveled by horse and buggy, or just right on the horse's back, or the real old-fashioned way, they would just walk on to where they had to go. So distances were really magnified. Things were further away back then, from the sense that it would take a long time to get from one place to another, even to go somewhere close. If you don't have a car, it takes a lot longer. And to get across an ocean. The King of England was very far away. But nonetheless, the conflict continued. And before you know it, the King of England was levying a sugar tax on the American colonies. And then a stamp tax on the American colonies. And then the Quartering Act. And all of this was done because the King of England was trying to extract money from the American colonists so that he could pay back the banks for the French and Indian War. So then you have the Quartering Act and you have English soldiers walking on the streets. So the American colonists are being taxed. They're having their money taken away. They don't get a vote. They don't get any say. And this is all happening from someone across an ocean in a time where there were no boats and no planes. Someone very far away telling you what to do. Then the Quartering Act of 1765 And all of a sudden, there are English soldiers all over the streets. And these soldiers, they will frisk you in the street. They will search your pockets. They want to see if you're up to no good. They'll knock on your door and say, hey, make me dinner. And by law, you had to make them dinner. They would say, hey, I'm sleeping in your house tonight. And you'd say, no, you're not. And they'd say, well, if you don't let me, I'm going to have you thrown in a prison cell. Think about the experience the American colonists had. Well, the American colonists were actually successful in getting the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act thrown out. They were repealed. They got rid of them. But then they had to deal with the Declaratory Act, where a king across an ocean who had already claimed that his authority came from the approval of God. Think about that. He did the Declaratory Act and said, I can pass any law I want, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the American colonists are sitting there like, man, all of these taxes, the soldiers in our streets harassing us, searching our bodies, knocking on our doors, having us make them dinner, sleeping in our beds, and now we have this king across an ocean telling us he could tell us what to do, we have no say? This is the experience of the colonists. Then the Townsend Act of 1767. They taxed goods like glass, paper, and tea. And of course, tea would be so important to the events moving forward because there would be the Boston Massacre, right? You had a drunk guy, he stumbles into a bar, he gets in a little scuffle with an English soldier. Next thing you know, there's a big crowd, everyone's angry. The English soldiers get scared, they take their guns, and they shoot their guns at the unarmed colonists. This was what the colonists had experienced. This was their life. This was their journey. And then in 1773, you have the Tea Act, which forced the colonists to get their tea from the British East India Tea Company, who was real buddy-buddy with the king, a corporation who was really buddy-buddy with the king. So the king said, don't worry, big corporation. Hey, listen, you give me money all the time, so I'll make sure you get what you want. So the king told the American colonists, hey, you don't have any say in this. You don't get a vote. You don't get any of that. And I'm going to sit here from across an ocean and tell you that you have to get your tea from England, from the British East India Tea Company. Well, of course, you would have, I think I mixed up the slides there, but you would have the Boston Tea Party. You would have the Boston Tea Party, and the colonists would dress up as Indians, and you know the whole thing where they threw the tea off the boat, and then the King of England says that's it, and he passes the Intolerable Acts, also known as the Coercive Acts. Doesn't matter what you call them, but basically he said, listen, you have no say even in your local government anymore. You don't get to assemble, you don't get to have meetings, you don't get to protest, you don't get to do any of it. And then Lexington and Concord, right, where the King of England, he told his soldiers, you know what, I don't like that these colonists have guns. So in the middle of the night, I want you to go to Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, and I want you to steal or confiscate all of the guns owned by the American colonists. This was their experience. This is what they lived. They understood why a government might not want you to have firearms, as that government's telling you, you pay taxes on this, you pay taxes on this, you pay taxes on that, but you don't get a say. Oh, I don't get a say? Well, maybe I can fight back because I have a gun. No, you don't get to have guns. Right? This was their experience. And then he's accusing people of treason, right? He wants Samuel Adams and John Hancock arrested and thrown in a cage, and ultimately he wanted them drawn and quartered. He wanted them to be tortured in front of a crowd of people and put to death. This was their experience. This is what they lived. This is what they breathed. This is what the founding fathers knew. But of course, who were these people? These people were woodsmiths. These people were carpenters. These people were welders. These people made things with their hands. These were a self-reliant people. They made their own clothing. They made their own shoes. These people were capable. They had skills, they had entrepreneurial experience, and they had critical thinking. And that's what you will have as well. And no one in this world could stop you from getting it. These people were farmers, and they grew their own food, and they took care of their cows, and they milked their cows, and they got eggs from their chickens, and they slaughtered their own animals and made their own meals. They made their own meat, produced their own meat. These were capable people. So when they didn't like what was going on, they didn't just protest, no Sugar Act, no Tea Act, no Stamp Act, no taxation without representation, no taxation without representation. They didn't stop there. They boycotted. They said, we don't need anything that comes from England. If you make it, we don't need it. We'll make it ourselves. We'll make our clothes. We'll make our shoes. We'll cut down trees and build our houses. There's nothing we can't do. And on top of that, a black market economy emerged. So they said, not only do we not need you, but we're not going to listen to you. A real divide between the King of England and the American colonists, where smugglers like John Hancock would take his boat to other countries that weren't England, and he would bring in tea from other countries, allegedly, whether the King of England liked it or not. And of course, the King of England, he would respond by confiscating the boat of John Hancock and many others. He would confiscate their possessions and say, no, I've accused you of a crime. You don't get to have that anymore. You don't get a trial. That was their experience. That's what they knew. That's what they lived. That's what had been done to them. And of course, they would have the Boston Tea Party, and they'd throw the tea into Boston Harbor. And at Lexington and Concord, Paul Revere would get on his horse and ride. The British are coming. The British are coming. Why are they coming? To take the guns. Why are they coming? To take the guns. And they would meet the British at Lexington and Concord. They'd have a standoff, and the shot heard around the world would start the American Revolution. They don't even know who fired it. And then, of course, the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, amongst them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we celebrate that Declaration of Independence every July 4th when we fire those fireworks into the air. I want you to think about that this coming July 4th. And they'd fight the American Revolution, led by General George Washington, who would later be President George Washington. And they'd win the American Revolution. And after all of that went down, do you think they wanted someone, after all of that, they wanted someone far away from them, telling them what they had to do again? Do you think they wanted someone who wouldn't be held accountable for his or her actions, telling them what to do? Do you think they wanted someone all the way across the world or all the way across the country telling them what to do? Remember, there were no planes and trains and cars. I don't think they wanted someone far away telling them what to do. I think they were very scared of that. In fact, originally, before they made this document, they tried something else where they tried to keep governments really, really small. And allegedly that didn't work. But the point is that they didn't want someone far away telling them what to do. No way, no how. They wanted government local. Because when government's local, when the person that makes the rules or the laws lives down the block from you, it's a lot easier to hold them accountable. You can look them in the eyes, right? Or maybe the people in just your town have your town laws, right? Or would you rather someone who lives all the way across the world or the country telling you what to do? They were very skeptical of that. So when they made the Bill of Rights, when they made the American Constitution, they took that into account. And they would come up with the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment said that all of the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to the states, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. So what the 10th Amendment said, what they put into the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, they said if the Constitution doesn't say that the big federal government, the president, right? If the Constitution doesn't say that the big federal government has a responsibility or a power, then we are going to assume that that power belongs to the state level, the local level, right? So if you live in Ohio, then Ohio will decide. If you live in New York, New York will decide. If you live in California, California will decide. If you live in Delaware, Delaware will decide. If you live in North Carolina, North Carolina will decide. The 10th Amendment was their attempt to keep government small. Now, has that played out the way they wanted it to? I would argue no, but that's a talk for another day. This is about the spirit. This is about the why of this document. Why did they make this document what it is? Remember, they had a king who had said he was chosen by God. So in the Declaration of Independence, what did they write? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They said to the king, no, you're not chosen by God. We all are. We are all created equal in God's image. They said they were equal to the king. That's why they did that. And then they made the Bill of Rights, right? And in that, they put the First Amendment, freedom of religion, right? Because the king had claimed to be a God king. And freedom of speech, because people had been arrested for just their words. Freedom of the press, so that the news media could report honestly on about what the government is doing. Now, do they do that today? I guess we'll find out. I don't think so. But the point is the spirit of it. Freedom of assembly, to meet up with your friends and to petition the government for a redress of grievances and say, I don't like what you're doing. Because they weren't allowed to do that. Because the King of England told them they weren't allowed to meet up with each other. They weren't allowed to talk about their problems with the government. The Second Amendment, because the King of England attempted to confiscate all of their firearms because he knew what he was doing was wrong. He knew that he was oppressing the God-given liberty, the rights of the American colonists, and he said, well, if they don't have guns, they can't defend themselves. That was their experience. The Third Amendment, no, the government can't just tell you that you have to cook a meal for a police officer and let him sleep in your house. Because that was their experience. The Fourth Amendment, your right to walk down the street and not be searched by a member of the military. Because that was their experience. The Fifth, Sixth, Seventh, and Eighth Amendments, that no, the King of England or anyone, a president, can't just accuse you of a crime, arrest you, put you in a cell and throw away the key. Or confiscate all of your money and your belongings before you even have a trial. No, they said, we will have fair trials in our new country, the United States of America. And the reason we know that's important is because of our experience. Or the Ninth Amendment, stating that we have rights outside of this document. It's pointing to the fact that this document doesn't give us our rights. They said in the Declaration of Independence that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Our rights come from God, our rights come from birth, our rights come from nature, our rights come from the very fact that we are here. This document simply limits government, but government finds new and creative ways to oppress people. You better believe that. You will experience that in your life. So if something's not outlined in this book, it does not mean you don't have that right. And of course, the 10th Amendment. They wanted to keep government small because they remembered that a king across an ocean in a day with no engine-driven boats or planes was telling them what to do, telling them that he had the authority of God and he could make their laws. If you take away anything from this course, and this is the last class in this course, and I can't wait to teach the next one, but if you take away any lesson from this course, don't let it be free speech. Don't let it be the right to bear arms. Don't let it be the right to privacy or fair trials. Let it be the why. Remember the why. Remember the experience of the people who came before us. And let their experience be your teacher for the oppression and the tyranny that will ultimately try to come down on you during certain points in your life. The future is what we make it. So we're going to make it bright.